Maybe we'll get started. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the second official gathering of the Committee for the First Amendment. Whether you joined our first meeting or are here for the first time, thank you for showing up. It's good to be with you. And I'm going to say, would you introduce yourself by putting your name in the chat and what you do and what you do in our industry? You know, it's pretty amazing. We just started. I mean, we're only 3 weeks old, and we've had nearly 3,000 people asked to join the committee. And our founding statement has been viewed nearly 5 million times. But I think the real story is not numbers, it's the energy that really matters. Artists, storytellers, and our allies all across every industry, students, teachers, activists, fans, everybody is reaching out, wanting to know how they can help defend free expression. And that tells me that we're tapping into a desire for courage, for connection, and for collective action. People are waking up to the fact that free expression, the cornerstone of democracy, is under attack. And that those of us who make art, film, music, television, we're on the front lines, whether we ask to be there or not. And people want to do something about this. They just don't know where to start. You know, I've heard from actors who've said, I've never done anything political in my life, but something about this feels different. Yeah, yeah. We're going to find out why in a little while. But this tells me two things, that there's fear. Yeah, there is fear. There's also resolve. People are afraid of what they may risk if they speak out, but they're more afraid of staying silent because they know that the work, their project, their client, their identity could be the next target of government censorship. And they know that if we don't use our collective power now, there may not be much left to protect later. And that's what this committee is for, to give structure and support to that courage. We're building readiness together. This committee it's a collective of artists, storytellers, cultural leaders, and those we work with, directors, producers, agents, managers, publicists, standing together to defend free expression against government repression, industry complicity, and intimidation. We're a trusted space, this committee is, where people in the industry can learn, connect, and act together, build our resistance muscles together. We convene in order to build community. We educate and train in order to empower. And we organize so that when it matters most, we can respond swiftly, clearly, and together. Okay, so this is what we're doing, or what we will be doing. We want to build community because we gain courage when we're together, when we're not alone, and there's strength in numbers. So we're going to be hosting regular convenings, peer-to-peer networks, and secure channels for groups of this committee to connect and support each other. We do not want to be gatekeepers. We will help with workshops and toolkits and communication tools so that you can speak and take action effectively and safely. But we also encourage you to come up with your own ideas about what to do. Ask yourselves, what role can you play in non-cooperation? You know, besides just signing up for this committee, what are your unique skills? Writing, music, performing, organizing, fellow agents, managers, and publicists to stand up and don't give in to the attempts to silence their projects, and this is really important, not to encourage their clients to play it safe and remain silent. I mean, that's their job, right? But this is a different time. We have to be the boss of what we do, not our publicists. We're going to host meetings and trainings like this one, bringing you the best and brightest minds to help us better understand the threats we're up against and what we can do about it. And in the near future, we'll want to do some of these gatherings in person. That'll be fun, so stay tuned. It's important that we have a shared understanding of what's happening from a historical perspective as well as currently. Now, last time, I think it was October 3rd, we did our first webinar, and that covered a lot of the history of authoritarianism. If you missed that, go to our website, Committee for the First Amendment.com, committeeforthefirsamendment.com, where we house all our events, toolkits, and more. We have to be able to mobilize quickly when something urgent happens, when we experience government censorship or government adjacent censorship and intimidation. We have to refuse to be scared, and we have to have a rapid response at the ready. Rest assured, when we need to, and we will do more than just speak together. We will act together. There are so many proven tools in this non-cooperation toolkit, and we're going to be ready to deploy them with you. The committee is composed of some of the best storytellers in the world, and we need stories, including ones that ridicule what's happening. The way the activists are doing in Portland with their donuts and frogs. And I just found out that is called tactical frivolity. Isn't that great? We have to engage in tactical frivolity. We need stories that demolish the false narratives the administration is trying to make normal, like immigrants are an existential threat and activists are domestic terrorists and un-American. We need stories also that show the irresistible future that we're fighting for. We are new, okay, guys? We're very new. So please understand that all this takes time to pull together. We ask you to be patient as our small but mighty team works to expand so we can make all this happen. But we're working hard. And right now, our ask of you is simple. Stay engaged, stay connected, keep learning, and organize together. Respond to our calls to action. Join our signal group so we can reach you quickly. Use your voice to model courage. Talk about the committee. Recruit others in the entertainment industry. The power will be in our numbers and our courage to stand together. Remind others that free speech isn't partisan. I just spoke in Nashville to a group of women. A lot of them were staunch Republicans, and I managed to make it. I said everything, but it was clear that it's not partisan, and they received it okay. It can be done. Free speech is the foundation of art, truth, and democracy itself, so we have to fight for it. And by being here, I hope you'll pledge to be part of our collective resistance. And that can look like not bowing to fear or power. Do not comply. Reject honors from co-opted institutions like the Kennedy Center. Prevent your creative work from being used to advance authoritarian agendas, for example. Do not be silent. Defend your peers when they're attacked. And above all, be brave. When they come for one, they come for all of us. And that brings me to our speaker tonight, Maria Ressa. I'm so excited. Maria knows better than anyone what's at stake when truth and free expression come under attack. She's a journalist, co-founder and CEO of Rappler, was awarded the 2021 Nobel Peace Prize. She's a global advocate for press freedom, and she serves as vice chair of the United Nations Internet Governance Forum, chair of the World Movement for Democracy, and co-chair of the International Fund for Public Interest Media. She's a professor of practice at Columbia University's Institute of Global Politics. Her acclaimed book, How to Stand Up to a Dictator, has been translated into 20 languages. Tonight, Maria will help us understand how democracy is being attacked in our country and our industry, and how each of us, as storytellers, can push back. Maria, we are so honored to have you with us. Thank you for being here.
Thanks. Thanks so much for having me, Jane. Oh my gosh. First, thank you for getting us all together and everything that you said. Yes. Look, I'll take you through what I've gone through in the Philippines, watching America. I am both Filipino and American, and it feels like I have both PTSD and deja vu. Let me, I'll do 3 segments of how narrative warfare, which is what we are living through, how that is changing the world we live in, how it's collapsing the checks and balances. The Philippines like the United States has the same constitution. We're patterned after the United States. Three, the checks and balances of government. I would say in my country, my dictator, Rodrigo Duterte, in 2016, took 6 months to collapse the checks and balances of democracy. I could argue, and this is what we're working on now in Colombia, is that in the United States, that happened in the first 100 days. And this is the moment now. Okay, facts, truth, trust. I've said this over and over at the Nobel Lecture in 2021. I showed that we're essentially living through, I'm calling it an information Armageddon. And a lot of that is because this is the battle, and it is a battle for facts. Uh, and I'll show you how the tech has taken us through it, right? Let me go directly to it. This is going to be a little techy, guys. And let me start a timer so this way I stick to it. Uh, People talk about artificial intelligence. Our world is ruled by artificial intelligence, but this isn't actually a tech term. It's a marketing term. It was coined over 70 years ago. And the kind of artificial intelligence that has gotten the most funding, tens of billions of dollars, is tied to the toxic surveillance model, meaning human beings have been commodified. Journalism has been commodified. We have been insidiously manipulated. And let me show you exactly how in the two buckets. If you're on social media, and a lot of our stuff is going to be on social media, every single person on Facebook, for example, has machine learning created a model of you. Replace the word model with clone. Consumer Reports a year ago said that there were more than 2,300 different big data sets that creates that clone. Then AI comes in and takes all of our clones, creates the motherlode database, and that's used to micro target. Micro target is not the old style advertising of media. Micro targeting means it chooses your weakest moment to a message and sells it to a company or country. That's social media. By design, lies spread at least 6 times faster. That's a 2018 MIT study. And after Elon Musk bought Twitter and turned it to X, this has gotten significantly worse. Now we add generative AI, which is, if you guys haven't used it yet, especially for people in your industry, your voice, your face, everything can be a deep fake nowadays. And I'll take that through generative AI. Both of these technologies, neither are anchored in facts. And generative AI, for example, the idea that's used here is that you push so much data into it that it should find accuracy. It doesn't. It is at best 16% accurate, meaning an error rate of 16% at best, and at worst a 79%. Let me show you what that means. Again, you already know this, but I just want to make sure we go over how that tech manipulates us. It's like a slot machine. It's mildly addictive. You have higher levels of dopamine and oxytocin, and you pull down the slot machine lever, you unpredictable rewards. You may win, you may not, but it's so quick to pull it down again that you do it. Mildly addictive, and this is what's happened to us, right? Personal, at the cellular level of a democracy, each of us, we've been slightly shifted. Um, There's a great quote from Yuri Andropov from Russia. He was former KGB chair, former head of the Soviet Union. He said, disinformatia is like cocaine. You take it once or twice, you're okay, but if you take it all the time, you become an addict, a changed person. We have all become addicts, right? So at the cellular level of a democracy, you can now be micro-targeted. And then you go to the next level, which is as a group, we behave differently in groups. This goes all the way to studies, sociological studies from the 1960s. And then the last part is when we are huge in scope, right? What is emergent human behavior? How is this when we're pumped full of toxic sludge, of fear, anger, and hate? The fact that that goes viral, that it can be seeded, how does that change us as human beings? If you have a devil on your shoulder telling you to hate, how does that change you as a human being? If you go down the sentence I've said over and over: without facts, you can't have truth. Without truth, you can't have trust. Without these three, we have no shared reality. We can't solve any problem. You can't have journalism. You can't have democracy. The next step then goes to, where are we now? These algorithms that rule our lives. A friends of friends algorithm is a growth algorithm for most of the social media platforms. And in the Philippines in 2016, if you were pro Duterte, that friends of friends algorithm moved you further right. If you're anti Duterte, you move further left. And over time, that chasm grew, right? Doxing, dogpiling, and bullying. The impact from the personal to the societal. And then here's the transformative impact. As of March this year, 72% of the world is now under authoritarian rule. Partly because of this, we're literally electing illiberal leaders democratically. The incentive structure of our public information ecosystem has been turned upside down. Imagine telling your child, lie all the time, and I'll keep rewarding you. That's the world we live in. And in almost every country we've studied, the two fracture lines that are pounded open, right, on purpose to create chaos is gender and race. All right. This, I just want to show you what I lived through in the Philippines, and we can do the same thing, and we are in America. We can map the information ecosystem. And this, in the Philippines, the disinformation, the propaganda was so systemic and systematic that it was broken down by demographic. The same thing is happening in the United States. The attacks against you are not rational. In fact, in America today, you rarely see any policy debates, right? The attacks are like, what happened to me? The way I look, the way I sound, the fact that I'm brown. I have eczema, so I'm not corrupt. I've been a journalist. This is my 40th year coming up. So what they did is almost every photo, every time they wanted to attack me, they took my dry skin and made it worse. And then the dehumanization began. Sorry, it took me a while to actually be able to show this publicly, but I figured, why not? Because this was public, right? So they called me scrotum face. And dehumanization is important, because if this happens to you, you've got to sound the alarm, because this is one step to violence. Online violence is real world violence. There's only one that lives in both worlds. And it took months for the platforms, for the social media companies to take it down, not completely down. And then again, look here, this was a PBS, a frontline documentary, and you can see again what they did to my face, but they're very creative. Vogue PH is a Facebook page. There's the scrotum face, right? The creatives have to move into this world. Anyway, I'm not alone. This is a 2022 report, the global trends in online violence against women journalists. You can say the same thing for women politicians. Ground zero of attacks for women politicians was Hillary Clinton. But look at the women journalists: 73% experience online abuse, 25% perceived threats of physical violence, and of that, 20% were attacked offline in the real world, right? Online violence is real world violence. Bring you to generative AI. I had my first generative AI deep fake from a Russian scam network, Facebook and Bing, and it went through Google. This was on crypto. And I now have almost every few weeks something new. If I'm selling crypto, it's not me. If I'm telling you, if you have diabetes, to throw your insulin out, that's not me, right? Every one of you. Here's the other question for you: how do you protect yourself when something like this happens? Um, Let me go through some of the ways that we then can take this apart, because I think some of these tactics you can use. So, because when you're the target of attack, it's horrific. I was getting an average of 90 hate messages per hour. But you also get all the data. So you don't have to ask the platforms for data. And what I did was study it. We pulled it together and we took an information ecosystem, a systemic view, right? This is the way we did it. And again, I'll send this to you, but what we did is we, as a news organization, I splintered this off as a separate company because within 4 months of the government trying to shut us down, we dropped 49% of our advertising revenue. So we took what we were doing as journalists and splintered it off. But what you should take out of here are two things. There's a lot of stuff on this slide, but only two things. There is the story you tell, what is the narrative? And then there is the way you distribute that narrative. Too many people focus on telling the story without looking at how they distribute it. And the stories you tell create the communities you build, right? And those communities, depending on what tech platform you're on, those communities then help you with distribution. I'll give you an example now of how lies are normalized. This is the same in every single country. We started tracking it in 2014. Seeding a meta narrative means that it doesn't have to go viral, right? You seed a meta narrative and then you pound it. Opportunistic amplification. I'm pulling these out, but you can see the narrative building. An example I can use here is in 2014, when Russia seeded the meta narrative that it used to annex Crimea. It was the same meta narrative pounded 8 years later that Putin used to invade Ukraine itself. And then you begin it again, right? So look at that seeding, opportunistic amplification, keep pounding the lie, say the lie a million times, it becomes a fact and it's normalized. Let me bring it to the United States, to something that's familiar to all of us. This chart was actually pulled together by the Electoral Intensive Project, right? EIP. And they had said Electoral Integrity Project. That's what it was. Look at hashtag Stop the Steal, this thing of something that was used to create January 6th, the worst violence in the United States. But look at when it was introduced, when it was seeded. August 20th, 2019, in an op-ed on RT, Russia Today, right? And then you can see it was mainstreamed a year later by Steve Bannon on August 11th, on September 15th on Tucker Carlson. Then the super spreaders came in and QAnon dropped it on October 7th. Then you had election, and then you had January 6th. The same exact thing happened in Brazil a year later to January 8th. This group, the Election Integrity Partnership, was shut down. Did only worked during the 2020 elections because the researchers were targeted ahead of 2024. So we didn't have that in the United States. All right, let me leave it with this, right? And this is the last thing that I want you to look at, which is how we took over. This is something we did in the Philippines in 2021. And we took over the center of our public information ecosystem by organizing in the virtual world. So what you are organizing in the physical world, mirror it in the virtual world, because when you do something in the virtual world, it's times four. We pulled almost 150 groups together, 16 news organizations working together. We did a data privacy agreement where we did fact checks. They don't spread on social media. But the second layer, the mesh layer, 116 civil society groups, the church was part of this, human rights groups were part of this, climate groups. So those 116 groups, anywhere from 100 to 1,000 people in each one, every day, their goal was Nerve, which is our company, would push out 5 fact checks, and each member of the group will share 1 fact check a day, but they will share it with emotion. And they cannot use anger. So you share the emotion, because essentially this is the way the technology hacked our biology. It's thinking fast. So we shared it with an emotion, and as we mapped the landscape every week, we saw, here's the best part, inspiration spreads as fast as anger. So that's the mesh layer, distribution. The third layer, universities, we gave them the data in the data pipeline, and every week they showed you What are the meta narratives being seeded? Who's being attacked? Who's benefiting from these meta narratives? The fourth layer, six left, right, and center legal groups. This worked, but let me show you what we saw. This was 2022. We splintered in the Philippines into four different clusters. And those clusters are important because that showed me a path forward, right? Those who cluster around news groups, they cluster together. Artists tend to cluster together. Activists tend to cluster together. You're both. This will be a huge, I mean, artists are like your own news organization now, right? But the part that was new to me were the faith groups. I'm a wayward Catholic, and when I saw this, it coincided with the time when Pope Francis called Nobel laureates to the Vatican. I went, and in 2 years, I went 4 times because the church helped us reclaim the facts. Here's the moment when we took over the center of the Facebook information ecosystem in the Philippines. This was in 2022. The blue are our partners. The orange are boundary spanners. The sizes of the circles are eigenvector centrality. Sorry to be so geeky, but look at the spread, right? The important narrative that the stories you tell, and you organize to work against the devil, to work against the design of the distribution of the platforms. That's it. There's so much more I could do. I could talk about tech more, but you are master storytellers, and I cannot wait to see what you will do, right? You have so much power if you organize yourselves. I think you will spark it.
Wow. I wish I could just listen to all of that all over again. I'm going to need to, are the graphics going to, Tessa, are the graphics going to go onto our website as well as?
Yes, we
Yeah.
will share the presentation and the recording with everyone.
Right. I'm not clear. Could you talk again, explain again? So you create a narrative that is irresistible and it is the truth. And then I didn't understand fighting for the distribution, getting it out. You said something there at the end that I didn't catch.
So any narrative right now builds communities, right? But the problem is that the information ecosystem we're in, the virtual world that's being mediated by for-profit companies, is actually killing, is preferentially giving greater distribution to lies,
Mhm.
fear, anger, hate. So if you think about how the tech has evolved, what they did is they hacked our biology. They used the worst of humanity, our fear, anger, and hate. And then that changed the way we feel. It changes the way we see the world, the way we act, the way we vote, right? And it's systemic. That's the part, right? I mean, this should have been illegal, but there you go. So what do we do with distribution? What we did was, because I live in a country where until 2021, for 6 years in a row, Filipinos spent the most time online and on social media globally. So we were the Cambridge Analytica whistleblower in 2018. That was, that blew up in America. Americans were the target, but the whistleblower said that they tested tactics of mass manipulation in the Philippines, and if it worked, they ported it over to the United States. So we were your guinea pigs. I mean, so a lot of this stuff now, it's just because President Trump, because he's the leader of the most powerful country in the world, right? It's what happened to the Philippines times exponential. Yeah, sorry, I can talk about this stuff forever, Jane, because
Okay, I have some prepared questions and then I'll come back to that. Most people, when they're attacked, they go quiet. And you've done the opposite. You got attacked and you kept getting louder and louder. Tell us why you chose to speak out.
I mean, at first the fear is real, right? Like at the beginning, if I could have, I'm a traditional journalist, so this is my 40th year. And at the beginning, when I was running a news, I was running Rappler. We're the third top online we're the top online news site, but we were small compared to the big broadcasters. I couldn't duck when the president targeted me.
Mm.
And I think that's also a moment, right? Like you either stand up and and live your values, and or you are a different person. You aren't who you think you are. I
Mhm.
think that was the moment. And for me, what when the only time I really realized how different the moment was a few years in 2017, they trended hashtag arrest Maria Ressa, 2017. And it looked ridiculous then, right? But 2 years later, I was arrested in my office. And that's when I realized the world had really changed. It had turned upside down. Sorry, long answer to your question, but the short answer is I had no choice. You really figure out who you are when you're forced to fight.
You've spoken about turning crisis into an opportunity. Tell us about that more. What that means to you and how it's relevant to the situation that we face today. What do you think our greatest opportunity is, and how can we be sure we don't pass it by?
Right now, what you're doing is a great opportunity, right? Let me say right off the top, from the things that you saw, when I was attacked and I was getting 90 hate messages per hour, I was devastated at the beginning. I was like, what the heck? Are these real people? Remember, this was like 2016, so it was
Mm.
very new. We didn't even have the words to describe it, right?
Mm.
And so I think turning crisis into opportunity became our mantra because I realized if I take that data, I can understand it. So the suffering, and you do suffer when you're targeted, right? I mean, that dehumanization is real, and the violence. I increased security for Rappler 6 times from July 2016 to the end of 2017. And until today, I still have closed-in security in Manila, but gosh, sometimes I feel safer. In fact, I do feel safer in Manila than I do in the United States now, right? I mean, that's the reason why I wanted you to also see how easily violence can flare because we're pumped up online, right? So, anyway, sorry, what a long answer. I
What about, some rich people are on our side. Not a lot of the billionaires, but some. I was married to one that would have been on our side. He's not well enough now, but enough really rich. So we could start our own media. Should we be thinking about that? Is that something or we could just
Yes.
make sure that PBS and NPR stay robust?
So what I didn't have time to show you is something that I just spoke to the European Parliament in Brussels on Thursday
Mhm.
last week about public interest tech, right? Because we should not be living in a world where everything physical is going to be translated to the virtual world. And yet this mediating line is controlled by for-profit companies, a
Mm.
business model that we didn't even have a name for until 2019, surveillance capitalism. So the first thing is, it's not just the tech companies that abdicated responsibility for protecting us in the virtual world, right? It's also democratic countries. And I will say it's the United States that
Mm.
allowed this to happen. The US government, governments around the world will spend money for libraries, for parks, you know, and yet we don't have a public interest tech stack. So what we did 3 years ago, so Jane, look, I've been living with this for a decade, almost a decade.
Mm.
And the weaponization of social media, which is what I showed you, is followed a year later for me by weaponization of the law. In 2019, in 14 months, the Philippine government filed 11 criminal charges against me. I had 11 arrest warrants. I was just going to like workflow posting bail so I could stay free. Until today, I've won 10 of those 11, but my 11th case is at the Supreme Court, right? So here's the other part, the opportunity. I forgot to say this. Please know that you should fight for your rights now. You are stronger at the beginning than you
Yeah.
are at the end, right? Because look, it's
Yeah.
been almost a decade where I still don't have the right to travel. In order to travel, I have to ask for permission from the Philippine Supreme Court. So, what you are doing is incredibly important. When we did Facts First PH, we relied on artists. We relied on our superstars, right? Because frankly, news organizations are under such attack. And what I see in America is, there's still a debate about whether journalists should be fighting for democracy. For me, when it is a battle for facts, journalism is activism.
Yeah.
And you see that.
Yeah. It was so great when all the Pentagon press all turned in their badges and walked off, including Fox journalists. That was yeah. So you said artists played a strong role in your resistance in the beginning. Could you give us some specifics about what that looked like?
Yeah. On social media, for example, artists have greater reach and you are not hampered by being a news group, right? So, for example, starting in 2023, think about how crazy this is for Americans who went to vote in 2024. In 2023, Facebook, there are only three ways news organizations get an audience: direct traffic, social, or search. In January 2023, Facebook choked traffic to news sites. It was a drop of between 50% to 85% globally, right? And the second one of search, because that was in 2023 generative AI search. By May 2023, Google began playing with what you're seeing today. They then called it search generative experience in 125 countries, America and the Philippines among them, right? Which meant a drop in traffic from search to news sites of, again, about 50% around the world. And before Americans voted in November 2024, both Facebook and Google rolled out generative AI search on well, it means that you no longer get links to news sites when you go search on Google. You get the answers. So that meant a drop of about 50% again of traffic. So as Americans went to vote in 2024, they had less facts, they had more propaganda, and they were pumped full of hate. I mean, come on, this is not right.
Well, how did you use artists in the
Oh,
Philippines?
the artist, yeah. Exactly for this, right? The cartoonist showed there was a really funny cartoon that won a global award where we were all, tindig means to stand up. And you had a hand that just stood up, and then slowly it's the first follower theory, right? There's a guy who's dancing, and then people follow. There were plays. Somebody parodied me. I mean, it was a funny, funny thing. I mean, look, in America, I will tell you that I spoke with Jon Stewart on the day after Jimmy Kimmel was
I watched that.
you know
Yeah.
so on that one, the spread of Jon Stewart, because he's not news, because on YouTube he's comedy, is far greater than most news organizations. So artists, you, Jane, I wish, I mean, we can quantify your reach. We can map a lot of these things. And if you organize online, you can beat the evil. We can beat the design and actually take over the center of the information ecosystem. What did they do? They did songs, some great songs. There were plays that were done, skits in the streets, and then cartoons. We worked very closely with them.
We know that authoritarians erode trust in good information. This is what you've been pointing out. And they twist reality so that there's no consensus on what's true and what's a lie. As people with platforms, how can we be most effective in fighting back? Are there specific types of stories or mediums that we should be employing to help resurface truth and help restore that trust? What's the best way to use our platforms, even though the algorithms may be working against us? Now, some of this you've answered, but let's do more.
Well, so I would say since this is a thinking fast world, right? There are this is who wrote that book, Thinking Fast and Slow,
Yeah.
right? This is also, I mean, look, on October 12th, How to Stand Up to a Dictator became #3 in the New York Times paperback, the bestseller list. But Thinking Fast and Slow was in the top 10. On Tyranny was #2, right? So Americans are looking for this. So what I think the first is understanding that we're living in a world that isn't thinking, not thinking, right? If you look at the way the first 100 days of President Trump, the narrative warfare that happened against Americans was actually dictated by his actions, the executive orders that he pushed out, 143 in 100 days. And each one of that, when we mapped, and I can send you this. We're working on the final parts of this report, but it essentially is the narrative warfare begins with the executive order. It's pursued, and then it switches. The end goal is to get rid of checks and balances that are there, right? And that's what we've seen happen repeatedly. Sorry, I didn't answer your question, right? You keep
No.
asking me.
Yeah. Yeah. How we can best use our platforms, even though the algorithms may be working against us.
The facts first pH pyramid, and I can
The
take you through
what?
that. We called it the facts first Philippines pH pyramid. That
Uh-huh.
was creating we pulled together, like literally, this is Nerve that did it, right? Journalists are very bad at activism. We're really not. But what we did is every day we pushed out 5 fact checks that our group created, and every member of the 150 groups shared the fact check with emotion. And in How to Stand Up with a Dictator, I actually said that I don't want to be a monster to fight a monster. I'm not going to curse, because the guy, President Duterte cursed me all the time, which, by the way, just to point out, I'm still, although I have to ask the Supreme Court for approval to travel, I'm free. And Duterte is now in prison in The Hague, awaiting trial. Impunity ends, but it will only do that if the people stand up, if the journalists stand up.
I like this idea of 5 facts that we put out, different 5 facts every day, and we send them to everybody, and they then send them out.
You organize yourselves. And again, this is,
Social media.
we learned this from Duterte, because Facebook literally came to the Philippines to help Duterte's campaign, and he took it. And so what we saw was how they organize it, right? They broke themselves up into 5 different groups that were geographic. And then every day, the central messaging system, I can send you this article, but the central messaging system, let's say the message is, I hate to say drink Coke Zero. Hold your phone in your right hand, right? Hold your phone in your right hand. And then the 500 members of every one of the groups will do it in their own personalized way. And they do it with emotion, and they do it with laughter. It's what you said earlier.
Great. I can see that there are questions from the audience, so let's do that again, and then we'll come back. And by the way, everybody, if Maria sends us materials, go to our website. We'll put everything she sends up on the website. So Tessa, what have we got in terms of audience questions?
Yes. And we're also going to put our email again in this chat. And if you're not receiving our emails, please email us so that we can make sure to add you our list so you get all this content regularly. The first question is from Paul Ogden. He says, I'm condensing the questions just for timing. I'm a Republican. How do you reach them when their sources are so siloed? Could you comment on how we can combat self-selection of news information sources? How can we reach people who are only getting their info from pastors or Fox News and don't watch other sources of news and entertainment?
I would hit the family and friends again. So, Socialnomics, which is a book that was published over a decade ago, and this is what was exploited by the tech companies. It said that 96% of what we believe in, we don't really believe in institutions as people, we believe in our family and friends. In the old days, though, the gatekeepers were news group, right? So, family and friends. I think I wonder if any of the Americans, let me just say, in my book, I also say my parents voted for Trump, for President Trump twice. They hate Duterte, but they voted for President Trump twice. I think every American family to some degree is divided. And what you pull together, how do you pull your family together? It's a word journalists don't normally use. Love, right? I love my parents. That doesn't change. They could vote for whoever they want, but we won't have this dinner table conversation. How are you going to reach them? That's part of the reason we built a public interest tech stack, and I can send that to you also. I didn't focus on it here because it's much later down the line once you organize yourselves. The public interest tech stack allows us to have real conversations with real people online without being insidiously manipulated. Just like Zoom right now, right? You don't have a personalized version of reality in each one of these. But how do you fix the fragmentation in a systematic and systemic way? That requires laws, right? Because part of the reason, so think about it like this: who benefits from this fractured information ecosystem? When people feel alone, when they don't know the facts, the challenge to every citizen in a democracy today is to figure out what civic engagement looks like in the age of exponential lies. Because if you don't have facts to organize around, how are you going to organize, right? So you create pockets and you connect the pockets, right? And it is person to person. It's a person to person defense of our democracies.
Great. Our next question is from Devin Wilder. He says, Maria, what is the most effective way to combat micro-targeting and manipulation of our information? This is especially since the data is now absorbed, sold, and stored, even after we all delete the app on any platform.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Americans are commodified more than any other ones. Europeans, I just came from Europe yesterday. It's not bad. Data privacy is a myth, the same way sometimes freedom of expression is a myth in America today, right? So how do you do this? If the cellular levels of the democracy are targeted, the I'm going to use Jane's word because a journalist doesn't use resistance, right? So the resistance comes from the cellular level of a democracy. So what are your values? Draw the lines on your values and I guess understand that the information Armageddon, that the battle is now. If we lose this battle, we could fall into decades of, and I'm going to use Madeleine Albright's word, of fascism. What is happening to our democracy is death by a thousand cuts. I write about this, right? It's like, think about like getting slashed and you're bleeding out, even a paper cut, you're bleeding out. And at some point, the body politic becomes so weak that you die, right? That's what happened to the Philippines. But I think, from your question, let me just give you something concrete. Civic engagement isn't just about holding the ultimate power to account. You have to figure out how to do it systematically. And we need integrity of facts. We need information integrity. So for me, before COVID, I used to say that we're infected by a virus of lies. And it's like our ecosystem is a river that's extremely polluted. And instead of just, getting a glass of water, picking it up, cleaning it up, and throwing it back into the polluted river, I want to try to close the factory of lies. So that's been what I've been working on right now. And I count on you, the artists, to inspire us, to tell us stories about the goodness of humanity, because that is not what you're getting online, right?
Mhm.
I've lived through so many horrific things where people, the kindness of strangers have shown the way. I think
Mhm.
that's there. Those are
Mhm.
things you need to remind us.
Mhm.
Sorry. I
Tell
hope I
us some
answered.
more. Tell us more. Kindness of strength, the goodness of humanity. What are the other things that we have to keep putting out there?
You're fighting against this to a degree, but religion, right? And organize. I mean, Christian nationalism is neither Christian nor nationalist, is it? I mean, sorry, maybe I shouldn't say things like this,
No,
but
say.
right,
Yeah.
right. It's like it's part of the reason I began to work with Pope Francis at the Vatican, because that's 1.4 billion Catholics
Mhm.
around the world, and Pope Francis and now Pope Leo have taken strong positions on artificial intelligence, on the technology. So
Mhm.
you can see, like for me, even though I'm a journalist, I want, my battle for me is getting, stopping the factory of lies. So
Mhm.
getting information integrity. Uh, but I think Jane, you know, the other storytellers, my gosh, I was just watching The Diplomat just came out, right? Like there are ways that you inspire us to, I mean, I don't want to live in a Black Mirror episode, right? Can you give us something better
Right.
than this?
Yeah.
But that's how, I guess, fear spreads, but so does courage.
Yeah.
I think, you know, the best part for me of living through the days of Duterte was my little team. Rappler is all of 120 people. And four or five of us, when we started it, were in our 40s, late 40s. And now I'm in my 60s. I turned 62. But our median age is young. It's 23 years old. So it's generational. It's knowing that the battle, oh, here's the last part. Embrace your fear. That's the first, and prepare for the worst. Because if you can, for us, for example, one of the fears was, you know, you'd have a hundred police coming into your office and shutting you down, taking your computers. So what we did was we drilled it. We did a scenario, drilled it backwards, and drilled it every quarter with the entire team. And I found that I had a
When you
new,
say drilled it, what do you mean?
like literally drilled it.
You mean
Um,
rehearsed?
No,
No.
randomly, we had men every quarter. So people knew, because we didn't know when we were, whether we would get shut down. So men would come into the office, and we don't, we, our team wouldn't know whether it was real or not, but we needed to, because that pulls all of our workflow processes. Like, for example, how do you protect your data? How do we shut down our services so we protect our back end from the government, right? So these are all things you think through. That's the first, is embrace your fear, because if you get rid of that, then nothing can stop you. I think the second one was well, there are all sorts of things that you need to put in place: the coalition and the narrative and the distribution, which I
Mhm.
think, you know, Jane, you've
We're
done
working
this
on that.
already.
We're
Yeah,
working on that. Yeah. Do you think that it's a mistake? I guess it's not to attack AI. I mean, the genie is not going to be put back in the bottle, right? But it's okay to just attack it straight on and talk about what bad things it's doing to us, even though it's not going to go away.
yeah, absolutely. I think that's part of, you know, I've been hitting a city a day in the last 3 weeks, because uh, our next generation, right? Kids are the ones that are most vulnerable to this, but all of us are being insidiously manipulated. Uh, I think the Surgeon General had written, I think under the Biden administration, he wrote the paper on the impact on kids, that there are greater incidents of sleeplessness for young girls, of eating disorders, of suicides, right? And then the other part, which I think we all picked up to a degree, is the epidemic of loneliness. That was one of his later papers, right? I think the critical part here is that you should not feel alone, right? It's great to see the chain. You are not alone. our values. This, I
Most
just,
Americans do not like what's happening. We have the
yes.
majority. We just don't always act like we're the majority. Tessa, come up with some more questions from the audience.
Well, that's very easy because we have so many questions from the audience. We won't make it through all of them, but please know we're reading all of them and capturing all of them, and they will inform our thinking moving forward. The next question is from Steph Dillion. She says, are there any specific lessons from history, McCarthyism, World War II, etc., that can best translate as fighting tools for the truth in today's tech landscape?
Gosh, actually, maybe Jane, you may know more in American history, but of course, what I've learned, what I've learned now watching it, right, is I remembered that women didn't get the right to vote until 1920s and that the Jim Crow laws didn't go away until the 60s. So it's natural that these fracture lines are being pounded open. I think the way to fight that is to, it's again, it's not just person to person, but to address it head on. Um, and it's scary to me that America, that freedom of speech, that freedom of expression is a myth. You know, in the Philippines, I at the worst of the time. So the difference here is Duterte killed maybe up to 30,000 people in the first 3 years of his administration. The first casualty in our battle for facts in the Philippines was the number of people killed in this brutal drug war. That's why he is at The Hague for alleged crimes against humanity. I think in America, what was worrisome to me is just how anti-Semitism has been, you know, the way Gaza has been politicized to the point that people, academics, are not speaking. Uh, yeah, it's, I used to say that the chilling effect is real, and under the worst of Duterte, we lived in Siberia. I'd say America is in Siberia right now on many ways. And the hard part is for I teach at Columbia University, right? We want our students, we want the next generation to be able to speak freely. Jane, that's why you brought this group back together. That's the core of democracy. I'm sorry, I don't have a quick answer for that question. Jane, do you?
No. It's an intelligent question. Let's go to the next one and maybe we can come back.
Okay, great. The next question is for Maria. We would love to hear you talk about how these strategies work at scale in a country as vast as the US. Do they just scale or do we need to create adaptations? And that's from Marhan Safinia.
Right now, I think that it is near impossible. So, you know, let's go back to how it began in the US. It was actually in the mid 90s when the internet, the vision for the internet was very, very different. And the 1996 Communications Decency Act was passed. And in that was Section 230, which is what the big tech companies are using for impunity, right? That's why they can spread the lies, because ultimately they are doing surveillance for profit, surveillance capitalism for profit. That's why they've commodified us. How does it work at scale? Look, for almost a decade, I was begging big tech, and I had data to show it. I was begging them to anchor in facts. I was begging them. I showed them all the stuff I showed you. I was getting death threats. It was impossible, right? This is not the world we lived in, and this is not the real world. But they had impunity to do it. So, okay, so how do we do this at scale? You organize at scale. That's what I mean. Right now, the pushback is coming from the states. The attorney generals in the states, and we know which states they are. California leading the way on this, even though Silicon Valley's in California, right? This is not a free speech issue; it's a safety issue. And I, I, I think we need to shut down the factory of lies so we can begin to rehabilitate that river, the public information ecosystem. So that's the first. And many of us will work in different ways, and we've been working at this for a while. But instead of just asking Silicon Valley. We built a public interest tech stack, and in the Philippines, we now have a federated news system that is working, that we worked in our that we used in our elections last May. And of course, I'm talking to my American friends about this, but what I see is the difference, right? Like there's a difference in the way Americans and Filipinos have reacted. And I think part of it is I used to think Americans are natural fighters, right? But you also are far more privileged than Filipinos are. And in the Philippines in 1986, we ousted a dictator. And that generation still lives. So even though I moaned about the lack of resistance at the beginning of the Duterte administration, the seeds were there. And we were able to keep doing our jobs, right?
Yeah.
The families of the drug victims had it. For America, you have to create it, right? Look, this group that you formed, Jane, found its roots in McCarthyism, in the McCarthy era. So this is up to you. And here's the best part. I'm sorry, it sounds like the good thing here is that if you look in the Nobel lecture, I said that we're standing on the rubble of the world that was. You're standing on the rubble. If you do that, then you can begin to look at what is there, and then you can begin to build. This is a time to build, right? So that's why we built our own tech. You can use it. I will give you the QR codes, right? But again, this is public interest tech. I was pushing Europe to do the same thing. It's a multi-pronged solution. This is not a one shot. There's not a silver bullet that does this, but I work on three concentric Venn diagram circles. I'm a journalist, so journalism, you can replace journalism with stories. Technology, which is how the backbone for how you build community. Those three, and we build communities of action. That's what a democracy is.
Yeah, well, that's what we want the Committee for the First Amendment to be, a community of action.
Yes, and we're just over time. I know there are a lot of questions specifically around the FCC and upcoming mergers, so just know that we'll use those to shape our future training so we can really delve into those questions and give them the time they deserve.
Can I quickly give you just this is really extremely dangerous. I think that's why if you look at Tegmark, if you look at that consolidation, what you're seeing is I I will send you the map of the US information ecosystem and how the far right is the most unhinged from reality, right? This is where like during the November elections, they said Haitians eat their dogs. That's a lie. But yet this spread the widest, right? The anti-immigration. Anyway, this is extremely dangerous. Laws are being changed. I think we need to keep an eye on this. And here's the hard part, and I'll talk about just mainstream media, CBS News. It's the first time in America that an opinion writer, editor will be heading a news organization. You know, we have our own things in our own hierarchy, the same way you guys do in your industry, but in our hierarchy, the news head more often than not comes from being a reporter because you send reporters into dangerous spots. We are, by the way, living through the most dangerous time for journalism in recorded history, right? Anyway, I'll stop there.
Okay.
A final question, maybe to end on, Maria. What do you recommend people here read? We got a few questions like that.
Oh my gosh. You know, first, if you haven't read my book, you should read it because all the data is there. And what we've lived through, you're going through, right? I joke that the Philippines went from hell to purgatory and America's going to hell. Please, let's not include that, right? So there's some lessons that are there for you. The second book I would recommend is by a former member of parliament. It's called The Tech Coup, and it was published in November last year. It's by Marietje, Marietje Schaake, Schaake. She was with Kaja Kallas, who's now the spokeswoman for the European Union, right? They were the two women sent by the European Parliament to Silicon Valley. And she is with Stanford University. I think spent 6 years or so there. That this book shows you how NVIDIA, how the chip is connected to each one of the tech that we're using, the tech stack. Um, you have to understand how the tech is manipulating you and how it's taking your data, commodifying you, and dehumanizing you. I think that's critically important because this is the newest thing. That is the gasoline to the fire. And it is not on the side of democracy, it is on the side of autocrats and dictators. In fact, it enables their rise.
Mm. Wow, this has been really, really interesting. We will put reading lists. We'll name the books on our website. How to Stand Up to a Dictator is the one that Maria wrote that we should all read. I hope we can have you back at some point, Maria. There's a lot more to talk about, but you've given us so much terrific ideas, so much to work with, and great. Thank you all for being part of this. Whew. We're going to get more information from Maria and we will send it out to everybody. Tell everybody about the committee that, but it's the entertainment business. A lot of people who aren't in the entertainment business are trying to join, but we're the storytellers. And keep coming back. Bring your friends with you if they're in the business. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Maria, from the bottom of my heart. I have to really digest what you've said. It's dense, rich, and so helpful. Thank you. Goodbye, everybody. See you next time. Thanks.